we get stuck in this pattern of self-neglect, and we get stuck in this pattern of feeling invisible, not putting effort into our appearances, not doing the things that make us feel good. And then this also can feel really hard when maybe your partner never needed to stop going to the gym, let's say. Like they've never had to stop looking after themselves because they didn't have a baby. Like they were physically and mentally able to. And then so that resentment can continue. So that also, as part of looking after yourself, it's healing this gap that often happens between people in their relationships, of you getting enough of what you need so that you're both getting what you need from the relationship as well.
This week's reviewer of the week is Jo Shanks, and she says, I listened to this podcast before getting pregnant and all throughout my pregnancy journey. At my 36-week appointment, things changed very fast for me. I went from one slightly elevated blood pressure reading at 35 weeks to my midwife telling me I most likely would be induced the next day at my 36-week appointment. I credit this podcast with all the knowledge I walked into that induction with. I was able to consent to certain procedures with confidence and deny others. I was indeed induced the next day, and less than 48 hours later, our daughter arrived. I did the daily exercises and truly believe that flipped our girl and got her in the optimal position. Next, baby, I am not procrastinating and will be taking the course. Thank you, Jo, for your awesome review. And I'm so excited for you guys listening today because I have with me Sophie Harris. So Sophie Harris is a pregnancy and postpartum psychotherapist and founder of Looking After Mom. Sophie has worked with hundreds of moms to manage feelings of overwhelm, anxiety, and low mood to feel confident and content in motherhood. She's passionate about supporting new moms through the complexity of early motherhood, and this includes both the beautiful moments and the difficult and painful times too. So with that, Sophie, thank you so much for being here today. I feel like you are going to be a wealth of information, and I know the conversation is so important because this is the kind of feedback we're getting right now. So will you say hi to everybody? Maybe just take a moment, tell us about your home and family life, a little about you, and then let's dive into the interview.
So really nice to be here, and thank you for a lovely introduction. So I have been working as a postpartum therapist, pregnancy and postpartum therapist, since my daughter was born. I started my business pretty much the same time she was born, and so that it's really been in parallel with motherhood. My family life. So I live with my daughter, and me and her dad have separated a couple of years ago now. And so I've been through a lot personally, and I have also been through, I've helped a lot of people whilst going through a lot myself. And I've had my fair share of mental health struggles along the way as well. And I'm just really passionate in my message about, for new mums, I think we often ignore the difficult moments. It's either you love motherhood and you just find joy in every moment, or you've got postnatal depression. Like there's not much in between of the complexity of how it's the biggest adjustment we'll ever make, probably. And of course, there's going to be really difficult moments too. So that's one of the main messages I like to give out.
Yeah, I love it. And we'll give out all of your Instagram handles and all that stuff and send it in emails and everything and do that at the end of the episode. But one of the things that I love going through your page is it just feels so natural to be there. You're like, yes, I feel like you're speaking to me, and you're just a mom going through it, except you have some really awesome education and knowledge on things that I might be struggling with or that other moms might be struggling with. So it's super solid information. And I hope people will definitely take time to connect with you there. Kind of speaking about that, can we just kind of walk into postpartum? Like how is postpartum defined? How many weeks, how many days? Like what does the time period look like for moms?
Yeah, so I think it actually varies. I'm in the UK, so in the National Health Service here, I think it's 1 year is how they define it. Some people define it as a lot less, and some people, I think we're starting to get this awareness that it can be a lot more than that as well, because there's just such a huge shift to your identity, to your hormones, to like how you are in this world as a mother, that actually it can be defined years later. And I know a lot of my clients really struggle with like, I had my baby 9 months ago. Why aren't I feeling better? I thought I'd feel better by now. Or I had my baby 2 years ago. Like, why aren't I feeling better by now? So I think it's a lot of reassurance that it takes a lot longer than what we imagine it will before we have babies to readjust and to find your new self in motherhood.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct. I know speaking with moms now, and sometimes they just feel a little confused at all of the feelings. I feel like some moms flow right into it, like no issues, like it's just the next step in life and it's beautiful and all this. And I'm a big proponent of telling positive stories and talking to people that have had positive stories. And I'm finding through conversation and not by any means of trying to make others feel left out or hurt, that if they are not having that experience, they feel like they've failed in some way. And that's not true, obviously. But can you speak a little bit to that and maybe even kind of guide us through, if you're a mom feeling this way,
Mm.
what are some things you can do, or what should it look like? Kind of even just some validation for that.
Yeah. So I am sure that there are some people who just glide naturally into motherhood, but I think we are hugely, what's the word? Like, it's misrepresented a lot of the time. Like the spaces that we share, whether it's online or whether it's at a baby class or in real life in some way, we often share our best bits of motherhood. Like, just take myself, for example. I had quite an easy baby. Like, she slept all the time. I was really lucky. Most of my clients' babies did not sleep all the time, or if you've got a reflux or a colicky baby, for example. But I loved being a mom, but I was also having this deep despair going on as well. Just not feeling like myself, like this loss of identity, just struggling in my relationship, struggling in many aspects of being constantly needed by another human being all the time. But often when I'd speak to people, it would be this kind of, the best bits would just come out because I did feel all of this love for my daughter. I did feel this huge amount of joy, but along with the most difficult bits. So I think a lot of the conversations we're having, we are focusing on the more positive bits. And so people who are struggling feel even more alone because it's like they just think everyone's having a great time, even when you're not, essentially. And just my words of advice would be that it is the biggest emotional, physical, mental, spiritual transition you will ever make becoming a mom. And with any huge transition, of course, there's going to be the difficult bits too. Of course, there's going to be bits where you feel really hopeless or you feel like you can't picture yourself feeling good again, and you'll have the highs and the lows. And I think it's to really expect those and not give yourself this false sense of, I need to be enjoying all of this because I have a baby now. Like, it's just part of the process.
Yeah. Do you feel like when moms are sharing those good things and they don't share the hard stuff, that it's maybe there's a sense of guilt there? Like as you go to, you have those thoughts, or can you maybe talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, I definitely think that can be the case, that it's a guilt feeling and embarrassed. I should be enjoying it. I should be grateful. There's people in the world who are going through so much worse than me. There's people, friends of mine, who really want a baby and they can't have a baby, and I'm there moaning about it. And I think that's very, very common. But I also think that people just, it is that bias towards sharing the good bits. Like on Instagram,
The Instagram life.
let's go to Instagram. I don't actually follow many of this like aesthetic motherhood type accounts. I don't find it that interesting. Like, it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't do anything for me. But every so often I'll like click on something. I'm like, oh, like this is what people are talking about. This is what people are seeing. And, you know, like the perfectly color coordinated and like 8 weeks of loving you, all of this stuff. Like, and it's all true, like, because they're not lying. They're not like making up that they're having a lovely time, but they're just showing their best bits. It's like, it sounds almost cliche to say now, like, 'cause we know Instagram are people's best bits. But I think when you're feeling vulnerable yourself, like you are comparing your real and complex experience to someone else's best bits. And it's obviously going to make you feel rubbish. And it's just not true.
Yeah, when you have women that you're working with and they're coming to you and these are the feelings that they're having, well, okay, first of all, how do women find you? How do women, because I mean, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because if women haven't heard of any kind of postpartum therapist before, then great, they're hearing it here. But how do women find you? How do they know to reach out to someone? Because I think part of the problem is they don't know who to talk to, or they talk to the wrong people and they get bad feedback, or they're invalid. They're not validated. So how do people find you? And then how do you walk them through that?
Yeah. So I think so people find me via my Instagram account, basically.
I love
And
that.
when I first started my business, it was much more like bits from Google, bits from Instagram, bits from like Birth Trauma Association, like these kind of places. But as my account's grown, it's just all Instagram.
That's awesome.
And I get a lot of feedback from people who go on my page, like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. Thank you so much. This is, it's made me feel so much better, because I think a lot of the experience is just realizing you're not the only one. But like everyone thinks they're the only one, but they're not the only one who's struggling. And to see it written in words, and most of my post ideas just come when I'm in therapy session with someone and they say something that I've heard a million times before. And then I'm like, oh, okay, write that as a post later. And because it's just so normal, it's just a normal human experience, but the bits we don't talk about so often. And with clients, how do I walk them through it? So I work with, it depends on what the person's going through. I'd say probably the two biggest things I work with at the moment are people who are feeling depressed or burnt out or depleted. Like they just their just mood is really low, or people with like struggling to regulate their anxiety or anger, like feeling a lot more rage than they thought they would, like resentment towards their partner, being irritable, struggling with that regulation that you need when you're getting your baby to sleep for the millionth time that day and they're not sleeping. So I think because I tend to work with those clients often, I do have a pattern of what I do with them. And it tends to start with like this kind of really helping someone build their capacity, finding the things that are going to make them feel better, and then really working on these triggers, like how to manage in the moment of these triggers, whilst also looking at the wider picture going on, looking at how we were parented and how this affects you when you're parenting. Because for so many of us who were parented in a less than ideal way, we're going to struggle in these moments because we've not had that experience of being parented how we want to parent. So it's a lot of learning about this, practicing how you want to parent, how you want to look after yourself, prioritizing yourself. There's so much there.
Yeah, there is a lot there. As you're talking about that, it's so funny because I'm like flashing back to before parenthood and the kind of mother that I was going to be. And I would never do that, or I will definitely do this. And as time goes on, I feel like, every couple of months I'm changing the parent that I thought I was going to be, or the life that I thought we were going to be living. Or I've seen some of those funny memes where it's like what my family thinks I do, what the school thinks I do, what I think I do, and then what I actually do. Have you seen any of those where it's like we build these thoughts of our lives in our minds, and sometimes we're dead on, and other times it's just not what we thought it was going to be. But that's motherhood. There's no like playbook that we can walk into it with and say, I know exactly what I'm doing. And that changes kid to kid and month to month. And so I think it is a lot to take in, especially as a new mom. I'm curious, when you're talking with mothers and you're helping them work through this stuff, what are some of those like really solid things that you think help build a strong foundation for a mom? Is it talking about their past and understanding where they come from? Is it connecting with other people? Do you ever send that, like, does it have to do with nutrition? Do you ever deal with nutrition at all? Like, what are some of those kind of like base things that you help women kind of build up from?
Yeah. So everything that you just mentioned, and I take a very holistic view of like postpartum care, maybe compared to previous jobs I've worked in where it wasn't a focus on that. In my private practice, I'm very focused on the holistic picture. So thinking about nutrition, food, someone, how they sync to their cycle if they're having one, like breastfeeding, like, taking into account all of these things. I would say the biggest shift that tends to need to happen early on before we can work on any of this is giving yourself permission to put yourself at the top of your hierarchy. Most of the mums that I work with aren't looking after themselves, and they're feeling burnt out. They're feeling resentful towards their partners if they have one. They're feeling like they've got nothing left to give, feeling guilty if they look after themselves. And the biggest shift is around them making time to do something for themselves, because it's that, again, very well known, but the putting your oxygen mask on first on the plane. Because I've experienced this. I started my business when I had a baby. I am no, what's the word? I know about hard work, but I work too hard sometimes. But what I've learned over the years of being really burnt out twice in the last 4 years is that if I am not doing my exercise, if I'm not making my juice or my smoothie or doing the things which make me feel good, getting my 10,000 steps in, whatever it is, getting morning sunlight, like none of the other stuff matters. Like I can't be a good mum to my daughter if I'm feeling depressed, burnt out, and physically ill. And I can't run a good business if I'm doing those. So it's like I've made myself put myself first, even when it feels, life gets in the way and it feels really hard. So I'd say that's the biggest shift to have early on before working on all of the other stuff you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because when we come home with our new babies, even if we have that intention that we're going to try to do that, it's so overwhelming. And it's like, we're just keeping baby alive at all times, that it is hard to kind of pull back and say, actually, I need a 20-minute shower alone without a crying baby, but it can do wonders when we kind of take that moment for ourselves.
Sorry, carry on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, because in the newborn stage, there's a very real, there's no time, man. Like, it's so hard. And then we get stuck in this pattern of self-neglect, and we get stuck in this pattern of feeling invisible, not putting effort into our appearances, not doing the things that make us feel good. And then this also can feel really hard when maybe your partner never needed to stop going to the gym, let's say. Like they've never had to stop looking after themselves because they didn't have a baby. They were physically and mentally able to. And then so that resentment can continue. So that also, as part of looking after yourself, it's healing this gap that often happens between people in their relationships, of you getting enough of what you need so that you're both getting what you need from the relationship as well.
I love that. What can women do? Just as you're talking about this, I'm like, I want to know if there's something women can do and with their partner, like prior to having the baby and actually being in postpartum. How do you help them prep for that? And how do you include the partner with, hey, if you notice these things, these are signs of, how do we teach them to work together?
Yeah. So I am going to say, give advice for everyone, not just people who are feeling acutely depressed. But I would say don't predict how you'll feel too much before having the baby, because you just don't know yet. Like it's so life altering, and in a beautiful way, in my opinion. But maybe we might minimize our needs. Like I work with clients all the time who maybe before having their baby, they're like, oh yeah, I'll still want to travel with work. Like there'll be X months by then or whatever. And then it comes to the time and they're like, hell no, I do not want to work, because it's just, or whatever version that is. We might think I've always been so independent before, I'll just be so independent with the baby. But actually there's so much shifting that goes on in that moment and after having a baby. So just trying to not minimize your needs. I guess that's point one. And to never expect your partner to understand what you're going through. Like they will never understand, however empathetic and kind and loving they are. They will never understand what it's like to give birth. They'll never understand the experience of being pregnant and how it felt to grow a baby in you. Like they'll never understand that postpartum experience. And so I think a lot of relationships can get trapped in trying to make the other person understand how hard it is often, or how much you've been through. But it's just a lot of that's not possible. So really trying to get good at focusing on what you need from your partner. What do you need from them? And really explicit. I need a hug when I'm feeling when I say this. I don't need you to try and fix it. I just want a hug and some reassurance. Or I need 2 hours to myself each week or each day, to make sure that I have enough time to look after myself. And I think sometimes as women, we can get trapped thinking our partner should just know, because we would just know because we're more emotionally intelligent. That's a massive generalization. But but don't expect your partner to know. Like, we need to spell things out, and we don't need to feel resentful about that, because we just operate differently. So really getting good at saying what your needs are. And then over time as well, it's just addressing the mental load that mums often carry, like kind of how to share some of that out whilst also letting go of control, because I think a lot of us mums really like to stay in control of situations as well. Yeah. Same. I think 99% of people I work with really struggle with control, because you do know how to do it best when you're the mum. Like, you spend all that time with the baby. And so when you watch your partner and they're doing it this really long, convoluted way, and you're like, and it's that part of you that needs to learn to stand back in those situations and give your partner space to do it in their long, convoluted way, because otherwise they'll never learn. They'll feel annoyed with you for not letting them have that space, and you will in the long term feel annoyed with them for carrying so much mental load and not being able to do enough.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point, understanding that even in their very best trying, they're just never going to be able to understand, which makes me feel like we need experienced, loving women around us as a community more than ever. Because having those conversations with your husband, telling him you need the hug or whatever, that's great. That's what he can provide. But you need somebody that you can relate to and hear stories from, and kind of like wisdom and generational information, so that you can like move forward as a mom. I feel like that is so important. And so and probably why what you do is so important. And the fact that you are a mom and you've been there and you can relate. It's the same with like having a doula in your space, right? Like she's somebody who's given birth before, and that's how I felt. So when she told me like, I'm doing great and you're doing fine, you're safe, I'm like, okay. But if my husband would have said the same thing, I'd be like, you don't know.
Exactly. And it takes the right person, and often a woman, to say it. And because women have a unique way of connecting with other women that men don't have in the same way, because we're just built slightly differently when it comes to that. And so I always remind my clients of this all the time. Like, everyone thinks, why am I failing? I'm struggling. Why am I finding this so hard? But we were never meant to do this alone. In many cultures, it is crazy that we bring kids up the way we do. And I always think, like, my mother-in-law, who I love dearly, she's from Zambia originally. And she would always tell me before she came to England, she was like, she had 4 children herself. And she'd be like, why do all these white people just have like 1 or 2 children? What's wrong with them? And she was like, and then she came to England. She was like, oh, this is why. Like, because it's so much harder, because you don't have all of your family, your sisters, you don't have an endless supply of adults to look after your kids for a few hours, like whilst you go to the hair salon or do stuff or like go to work, do things that we would not have like most people don't have in our society. And that is why it's hard for us, because we don't have this like wider network that we really would benefit from.
Yeah. Will you talk a little bit about the immediate postpartum and kind of those first few weeks? What are some signs? What are some things that are normal? Walk mom through a normal postpartum experience, even where you have some feelings, because I feel like we need to normalize the fact that becoming a mom is just hard sometimes. But then also, what are those things that women need to be looking for when it's time to get a little extra help or reach out to somebody?
Yeah, good question. And I think versions of this get answered all the time, because we're all asking ourselves, do you have postnatal depression? Do I have postnatal depression? And it's like, that's such a commonly asked question. And my answer will vary, like, compared to someone else's, just to say that. But I would say totally normal to feel ups and downs, and big ups and downs, and crying and not feeling like yourself, and looking at your body and being like, what the hell have I done? And like, with the absolute joy. I remember in my early postpartum stages being so in love with my daughter from early on. Many people don't feel that love straight away. It takes a lot longer to grow. But I was so in love, and I'd be like, I want 10 children. This is the best thing ever. And then an hour later, I'd be like, maybe this was all a mistake. I don't think I should have had a child. Like this, like what have I done? And then it was just such an emotional roller coaster in those early days. And I think that's all really normal. And we don't need to be enjoying every second. Like it is just, yeah, you need a lot of comfort and support as you go through that. It is also very, very normal to have an increase in anxiety, especially if you're a first time mom, because you're looking after a new human being. Like, of course, you're going to feel more anxious. Of course, you're going to feel anxious as you're learning to care for this new human being. But I'd say the times when it could be worth getting support, although you could get support at any of those times too, it would be that maybe if your low mood or anxiety was causing you a lot of distress, like maybe you weren't able to function or do the things that you wanted to be able to do, maybe you're feeling consistently awful and really struggling to bond with your baby, feeling really hopeless, disconnected. Maybe, let's say the anxiety, maybe it's getting worse rather than getting better. Like it's not getting any better, because with the anxiety, you would expect maybe after a few weeks or months, as you get used to having your little human being with you and you learn that they can sleep all night and you don't need to check their breathing every so often, like that's kind of quite a natural process. But maybe you can't stop. Maybe you've like glued to all these monitors and all this stuff that's on sale now, and like all of this, yeah, it's just meaning that you aren't able to function enough. And maybe you just need even another woman or a therapist just to give you that gentle nudge of practicing to reduce some of that anxiety.
Yeah, I think all of that's really good information. It's good. It's refreshing, I think, for moms to hear that motherhood isn't easy and it's okay, and that's actually normal for a time. You know, we can take it down the road and go a little too far or have some more struggles, but dang it, motherhood is hard. And I think it's okay to say that.
It's hard and it's beautiful, isn't it? Like
Yes.
I think the best things in life, like if they're so beautiful and so meaningful, they're also generally really hard. Like there's not many things you do which is just beautiful without the really hard bits. And so I think it's like really holding that in equal measures.
I love the way you said that. I totally agree. We did have a couple of questions that I thought were super solid that came in from Instagram. And I know that these are questions that moms across the board have. So I'd like to ask a few of those. The first one is, how can I set boundaries postpartum? And what are some examples of boundaries that could be helpful for me to set?
I'm actually writing a workshop about this at the moment, like people pleasing and boundary setting, because this is something that so many of us struggle with. And so I'm not quite sure from the question whether she's referring it to her partner or family members, but I'll just touch on both of those. I think one of the most common boundary issues that happens after birth is setting boundaries with family or in-laws around visiting or things like that. And I think a lot of mums struggle with this. So just really trying to get in tune with what your needs are and practicing. I feel like this isn't a particularly exciting answer, but many of us really struggle with this idea of not being liked, or that they may think such and such about us. But if what you're asking is a reasonable boundary, it's like being able to practice saying, this is what I need right now. Like, let's say if it's around post-birth visiting, maybe you need a week or 2 weeks just to get in, to get used to things before having a baby. Like feeding can be really hard when you're doing it in front of other people, especially. And then it's just really trying to say, I know that this isn't what you would have wanted, but we're really excited to have you, but I just need a week or two or whatever it is. Because I think this role crossover, like grandma, like they're my grandchild, and like it can get crossed over. And so it's how to acknowledge that that is their role, but you are also their mother or father. And it's, yeah, like kind of staying strong in that, saying strong, but like, like kind. Like we don't need to be like mean about it, but it's like trying to just hold on to that boundary and like understand that they may feel a certain type of way, but this is what you need, and this is your unique time and how you need to be looked after.
Yeah, it's kind of that tricky, like we were just talking about the importance of having this generational knowledge and wisdom and help and all that stuff. And then also sometimes we don't like the way that it's given. And so we need a little bit of a pushback and a boundary for that. So it is tricky navigating postpartum and family and all that stuff. It's a lot for a new mom. One of the questions was also, is it wrong that I wanted to go and do so soon after birth? So kind of that like guilt of like, I actually feel fine and I want to get out of the house or leave the baby behind. Like she said, I didn't want to stay home and feel lonely and sad. And so what are your thoughts behind that?
Absolutely not. So that is absolutely fine. Go ahead, do what you need to. And just to really validate, like we all have different preferences. And I know a lot of it will be societally affected. So in the UK, typically we have a year maternity leave and that's normal. Whereas I know in the US, it's so much less. And that's shocking to a lot of like people in the UK, how much you guys have to deal with of like, be ready to be active early on. But I think we really need to own what works for us. Like whether you decide to breastfeed or bottle feed, because actually bottle feeding may work really well for you because then you get a sense of independence that you need to really thrive in those early stages of motherhood, and you can share things more evenly. Breastfeeding may work best for you, and if you're able to breastfeed, like to have your baby with you all the time. I personally I had my daughter during the pandemic, and it was just me and her all the time. Like there was no family around. It was kind of depressing, but I got really used to that, and I found it really hard to let go of control over that, like in time, because it had just been me and her for so long. Whereas maybe my best friend at the moment has just had a baby and she's much more up for going out and leaving her baby from much early on. And she's having a lot like less stress in her motherhood than I did in the early stages. But just really knowing that there's no right or wrong, even if your friend does something completely differently to you, like it's absolutely fine, and really owning what works for you and staying true to that.
Yeah, I love that. I remember when I would teach birth classes in my home and we'd do the postpartum, like everybody's had their babies. Let's come back and share birth stories and show off our babies and enjoy each other. And it was so interesting to me because the moms who had gone back to work, now they were sad about that a lot of the time. They wanted more time with their baby and all that. Emotionally, they seemed to be in a better place than the moms that were at home with the baby all day, every day. And I thought that's so interesting because we do get stuck in this, I have to be mom and it's all that I do. It's my identity now. It's all of my identity. But I thought that was fascinating because the moms that were getting up and getting out and going and doing, even if they had a desire to be more with their baby, were more emotionally stable afterwards, which I thought was so interesting.
And
Yeah.
I think maybe like at least part of it is that what we've spoken about with societal norms, like we're not meant to be raising a baby alone all day. Like that's so unnatural, isn't it? Whereas maybe if we had a collective of people who we trust and we could just sit on our sofas next to each other and not have to talk, like it would be a very different experience for those mums who are at home. But most of us don't have that.
Yeah. And it's why I love things like La Leche League so much, right? Like you take your little breastfeeding baby and holy cow, you don't even need to be breastfeeding, but you go to a La Leche League meeting with a bunch of other new moms and you talk about mom stuff and you help each other and you support one another. And it is so invigorating and helpful postpartum, having nothing to do with actually getting the help that you came there for, like it's such a it's mentally invigorating to be around other women that are doing what you're doing. So I love that. We did have another question. I think this is so solid because as women, we want to know how we can help each other. And she asked, how can I help my friend who is struggling postpartum when I did not personally experience postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety?
So I always love questions when people say, how can I help my friend? I just think that's really nice. And I think, what is it? Probably listening and not too much advice giving unless asked. Yeah, I think that is really listening, validating. And I expect this person, if they're asking this question, they wouldn't be doing this anyway. But like, well, for me, it was easy when this happened. I don't think they would be doing that anyway. But making comparisons that could in any way make that person feel like it was because of them that they're not doing good enough. But just really recognizing the truth that all babies are different, all experiences are different. Like all of our backgrounds are different. Someone who has had a lot of childhood trauma themselves is likely to struggle a lot more in postpartum than someone who had a very like a different kind of upbringing. And just lots of validation, being there for them, asking what they need, maybe taking food over, like kind of doing like those practical things as well. And then just, yeah, I think it is just listening. I would say there is a practical approach of how you can help them to feel better. Maybe if they're feeling anxious about going to such and such a place, you could offer to go with them. I think that's a real extending of love. But it's not crossing over into that unwanted advice. Like, I think sometimes that happens, isn't it? Where we want to fix things and make it better. And it's really being led by your friend and just trying to have as much patience as possible with them.
I love that. Before we jump off here, and I want you to talk about, you guys, you are so generous and you have a free download for all of our listeners today that is going to help them along their journey. So I want you to talk about that. But before we dive into that, is there any kind of like last words of encouragement, or like, what do you want to say to like every postpartum mom as she's like moving through that journey?
So my words of encouragement are that you are doing a lot better than what you think you are. Like, you really are. And that the difficult times are completely normal, that you will feel better again. Like, I went through many times where I questioned whether I'll ever feel better again. And now I do feel better again. And I genuinely thought I wouldn't. And like, life feels sweeter when you've been through a lot, because for me, I really appreciate all of the little things that I never really appreciated before, because I've had that adversity. I've gone through those difficult times. So just really know that although it feels like you won't feel better, you actually will. You just can't imagine it because you've got a baby now and life looks completely different. But it takes a long time to make that huge transition. And you will do it eventually.
Thank you. Okay, so why don't you talk about this freebie that you are so generously offering to everybody that will help them as they're coming up to or are in their postpartum?
So this is a journal. I can't talk. This is a journal. So it's about loads of the questions that I would ask myself during my postpartum time to help myself feel better. So I think it's such a time of ups and downs, and just really helping you to focus on like the positives, helping you to set an intention for the following day and like how you want to feel. I used to sell this, but I've just started giving it away for free. And it's a mood booster journal. So enjoy it, and I hope it helps.
Thank you. Yes. And I'll send that out in email if you guys are on the email list this week, or you can download it in the show notes. And then will you let everybody know where they can find you and how they can connect with you?
Yes. So the best places to connect with me are on my Instagram, which is Looking After Mum. And my website is www.lookingaftermum.co.uk. I offer therapy, and I am creating monthly workshops about stuff like how to manage mum rage, like reduce people pleasing, recovering from depression and burnout, and just all of the stuff that comes up in my sessions all of the time, but in a much more accessible way, so that it doesn't mean that you need therapy or have to pay for therapy, in a much more affordable, condensed way. So I'm really excited about offering these.
Yeah, that sounds really neat. Well, thank you for your time today and for being here, all your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.